a couple of things about that. The image in my mind is, a river will run through different ecosystems, so while one part of the time the river might be going through a mountain, and another time through like a high desert area, and maybe the river will go through kind of a wetter area or something like that. And so kind of there's, as our nonprofit river is also going through, we are entering a different ecosystem in which we're operating in a couple of different ways. So one of those, I think, is the entrance into the nonprofit management circles and kind of the management tiers by people in Gen X and Gen Y, people that are younger than the baby boom generation. And one of the things that I think is difficult for these people is that their older generation did not themselves have career paths. So it's hard for them to imagine or to create career paths for younger people. And in our sector, we need career paths that cross organizations. That it's not like a huge, gigantic company where you can have a career path that takes you all over the country and through many different cycles while staying in the same company. Like many other industries that are very small business oriented, career paths in our sector will need to cross fields, cross sectors, and cross organizations. There's been a lot of talk about the idea that younger people don't want to become executive directors because they see how irritating and burnt out their executive directors are. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not grumpy, it'll just be bad, right? But I think it's interesting that a national study by the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network, YNPN, showed that 30% of Gen X and Gen Y people want to and expect to be executive directors someday. And maybe more important than that is a national study that I did earlier this year on long-time successful executive directors and what they do after they leave their jobs, how they think about leaving their jobs and what they do after they leave their jobs. And this wasn't part of the study, but one of the things I learned from them is that in fact, none of them had said in advance, I want to be an executive director. In fact, all of them had been on management teams saying, I don't want to be an executive director. Are you kidding? I want to be in program. I hate fundraising. Look at how burnt out my exec is. I don't want to do that. But then the right job came in front of them, and they took it. So I'm not so worried that there will be people that don't want to become executive directors because it's just that the right job hasn't come in front of them. Like I talked to one woman who had been working at the YWCA for many years, and she had been running a program for girls, their younger women's program. And suddenly somebody said to her, this Girls Inc. is opening has a new executive director position, and suddenly she thought, that's the job for me. So she, after all these years of saying she would never do that, she went ahead and did it for 25 years very successfully. So I'm not as worried about the younger generation. And I think, of course, like every generational it's kind of a generational handover of the nonprofit sector, one organization at a time. And what we're seeing, of course, is that older people are always saying, like we have throughout history, I don't feel like these younger people are quite up to snuff. And the younger people are saying, as they have said through history, get out of the way. I think another thing is that whereas we have been, nonprofit leaders have been in a long period of growth and aggressive growth strategies, and growth is good, shrinking is bad, in the nonprofit sector, I think the economic turmoil in our country is going to mean that for the next period, for many years, we're going to need to think about strategies that are not necessarily growth-oriented. There need to be ways that we can understand strategies that are actually about condensing, or strategies that let us grow, shrink, quickly and rapidly over time and over again, rather than thinking that the right curve is always a curve towards growth. I don't believe that's going to be possible for many of our organizations, or even the right thing. And yet, when we talk about management, you hardly ever hear strategies that are about strength that are not based on growth. But that's because we've been in a period of American economic growth for so many years. We've forgotten that there need to be some other strategies. So back to those two studies. Now, one of the things I said to you that Compass Point had reported that 75% of executive directors said that they were going to leave their jobs within 5 years. Well, I think there's two very important things. First of all, we had done the same exact study, same exact question, I should say, in a different study 8 years before, and exactly the same percentage, 75% of people said they were going to leave their jobs within 5 years. So that is not necessarily an indicator of change. I believe that what it is actually is an indicator that everybody in the United States believes that they're going to leave their job within 5 years. You just don't see anybody saying things like, well, when are you going to leave your job? And they go, oh, I don't know, 18, 19 years from now, you know. And all of us know people that have stayed on their jobs for 15 years, you know, 2 years at a time, right? So I think that finding has been very misinterpreted. It's kind of this the leadership crises, I think, are today's version of Y2K problems. Remember Y2K, we thought that everything was going to shut down on January 1, 2000, and I think, you know, 4 or 5 ATMs in Connecticut didn't work for a while or something. So this is covered. A lot of consultants made a lot of money changing over everybody's systems to be Y2K compliant. And then I think the other thing is that one of the things that the Bridgespan study, I think, did was that they included everybody in management teams for their number of 640,000. So they actually did straight line projections on two things. One was the number of new nonprofits, and also they looked at the number of people on management teams to create the number $640,000. 640,000 people. And actually they also looked only at people from younger generations entering the nonprofit workforce. And I think one of the other really interesting things that we're seeing right now is also a very new phenomenon, is we're seeing people at older ages, at 40s and 50s, 60s, and even 70s, entering the workforce, the nonprofit workforce for the first time. They've coming over from government and from the business sector. So when we talk about emerging leaders in the nonprofit sector, yes, we use people that are 30, for example, or 35, but some of our newest leaders in the nonprofit sector are 65. It's hard to kind of get our minds around that, but it's very true. I think the second important thing is that most nonprofit execs, like most people in all of society today, are not retiring at traditional retirement ages. So this study, for example, that I did for Grant Makers for Effective Organizations on what executive directors do when they leave their jobs, all of them went to work at different nonprofits.